We're now going to move on to our final presentation of the day, new qualitative research methodologies to learn about composting behavior and beyond, from Corinne McCarthy from C+C Consultancy. Corinne is the Market Development Director at C+C, who will be talking about kind of insights on people's behaviors in their homes regarding composting and more. Corinne is curious by nature with a favorite word. I love this. Her favorite word in the entire language, the entire human language is why. I love that. I might even steal that for my own bios. Her unique blend of creativity, analytical thinking, and pragmatism enables her to uncover market insights and successfully translate them into fodder for awesome marketing and communication strategies. And if that hasn't raised the bar, Corinne, I don't know what would.
Thanks for having me join you here today. I've really actually enjoyed particularly the student stuff, so thank you for that. What I'm going to talk about today is qualitative research, which does not mean that I'm anti-quantitative research. In fact, I have a degree in statistics, and we saw how your students today used really great quantitative research to inform their strategies. But qualitative offers something that quantitative doesn't. Ideally, in an ideal world, all your projects, you would use both qualitative and quantitative research, but that would really mean you have all the money and all the time in the world to do your work, and that's unrealistic. So what I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about how qualitative research can get you insights that help strategies in ways that quantitative research really never can. And C+C, we do a lot of social marketing, and social marketing is an approach used to develop activities or communications that are designed to change or maintain people's behavior for the benefit of individuals and society as a whole. So for example, getting people to do composting when they haven't done it before is, you might want to create a social marketing program for something like that. And what I'm going to talk about now is a little bit about why qualitative is important for understanding really the drivers behind why people do what they do. So I'm sure everybody's seen some example of the iceberg in their education at some point, but it's still such a good analogy that I like to draw it. So the things on top on the surface are the behaviors or what you can see and measure. So in the composting world, you could dump out someone's compost and say 20% of this shouldn't be here. It should be in the garbage, or it should be in recycling. But what you can't do is say, and the reason for that is, without talking to people. So the motivators and the barriers really lie underneath those behaviors, and you really can't make assumptions about those drivers based on what you see on the surface. So what I'm going to talk about here is, one of the reasons that humans are extremely complicated, or actually a few reasons that humans are extremely complicated. I always say they are the most unpredictable factor in any equation. But there's three things I'm going to talk to today, and these are actually more about how your brain is wired, that goes along with some of the things that I showed on this slide. Your concept of justice, or how you feel about education, is impacted by these three types of things. So the first is decision-making and behaviors, which are driven by two types of thinking. Everybody has system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is very fast. It's stuff that happens unconscious. You're doing things automatically. It's all your everyday decisions, and it's very unreliable. And sadly, 95% of our time is spent in system 1 thinking. System 2 thinking is much slower. It's very conscious. It requires effort, and this is where complex decisions are made. Now, why is this important? Well, what most people do as part of their routine in a particular day happens in system 1. And so the reality is, to really understand that, we have to work with them to get them in system 2, so that we can be more thoughtful in understanding why the things happened the way they did. For me, the best example of system 1 thinking, and I have done this a million times, so I hope I'm not the only one, my pool is on the way to how I usually drive to the office, or back in the day before COVID. And there were times where I would be driving to the pool and I would just keep right on going because I'm so used to driving on the office in that route. And so that's my system one taking over. I'm preoccupied with something else and system one says, oh, we're on this road, we must be going to work. Psych. So I'm sure all of you can think of times when that's happened to you. And why this is important in research is, depending on what our research objectives are, we often want people either in system one or in system two thinking. The second thing I'm going to talk about that plays a big role is called cognitive bias. And it's really, the cognitive bias is sort of the built-in precepts that we have. We've got them either through society or experiences that help us kind of do decision-making shortcuts. And they make most of what you think is a conscious decision are really being filtered through all of this. And what's important here is, I have it as a researcher, my respondents or the people I'm talking to it have it, and my clients have it. So it can be really hard to understand and reconcile my bias with something somebody else says. Oftentimes clients have a hard time understanding the bias of respondents. One type of bias that I like to use as an example is anchor bias. Anchor bias is, we tend to think that the first thing we heard about something, we give that more weight, more credibility than things in the future. And that's a problem because with science, we sort of change as we grow and people get really caught on those old things. An example for recycling is 9 times out of 10, if you ask somebody, how do they know if, here, I'm gonna give you this piece of this plastic jug, how do you know if it's recyclable? They say, if it has the recycling symbol. Many moons ago when I was a youngster, that was something that we were taught, but it's not really true, but people still believe it today. So bias is something you have to be very careful about. The last thing is what we call the real versus projected self. And I think this picture sums it up. We all have a side of ourselves that we either aspire to or we want others to think of us as. And honestly, for some facets of our lives, most people could tell you some of the times where they have a projected self versus a real self, often around exercise or diet or, things like that. But there are lots of times when they don't know, they don't have an awareness that they're actually projecting something. And we hear this a lot in recycling, how people say, oh, I'm a great recycler. I know I'm a really good recycler. And then you ask them, what do you do with this? And they don't know. So everyone has an aspirational self, and it's important when you're talking with people to use techniques to understand, is that a projected self or a real self I'm talking to right now? So those are kind of 3 very complex concepts that I've sort of boiled down to nothing. And what's really good is that we can handle this complexity using qualitative research. There's a bunch of different techniques. We look for nonverbal cues. It's the type of questions we ask. One of the most important things is that when we do qualitative research, we're having a discussion. It is not a Q&A, and that can be very hard for somebody who's used to doing quantitative research. So I've sort of said a mouthful, and what I'm going to do here is show a few case studies of how qualitative research got to insights that you could never get from quantitative research. And our first case study was with King County Waste Management. And the business challenge was to create a social marketing campaign that reduced residential compost contamination. So again, this was a scenario where what's coming in to the composting area had huge amounts of things that aren't composted in them. So we could measure that. We know X% of this stuff shouldn't be here, but we couldn't understand why that was happening. So we decided to talk to people in King County who were, actively involved in composting. But what we did was we did in-home I call them in context. We were in their home when we interviewed them, and we did it 1 or 2 days prior to compost collection day. And what did we do differently? Well, they had a homework assignment. And what they had to do for 5 days prior to our coming was collecting what they would have normally put in their compost bins and put them in a plastic bag and put them in their freezer. And then at the end of the day, they were asked a few questions about, what was in there. Typically, there were questions like, which things were you not sure of? Which things are in there all the time? That type of thing. And then we went to their homes and we pulled out their frozen compost and we looked at their answers and we had a whole discussion about composting. It was actually super interesting, but we found some really interesting things that I don't think we would have found using quantitative. And the first is that people had really heard 2 very important messages that had been put out in King County. The first one was that food sold pizza delivery boxes belong in the compost, not in recycling, those cardboard boxes. And the second one was that anything you put in the recycle bin needs to be empty, clean, and dry. And what we found was people were kind of extrapolating this to mean, oh, a soiled recyclable should go in the compost bin. And we were finding milk cartons and like yogurt containers because people said, well, it was dirty, but it's recyclable, and just like the pizza box, so boom, it's going into the compost bin. That was really one of the most surprising things we found. We didn't know whether to be happy that they'd heard the 2 messages or sad that they were sort of putting them together. The second finding was that experiences with commercial compost programs and compostable packaging led to a whole bunch of confusion. I can't tell you how many people talk to us about how Taco Time has all this compostable packaging. And so anything that they got that looked like that Taco Time packaging went into their compost bin. And they would see plastic forks going, that were compostable in a restaurant they're in, going into takeout into the composting because it's a different standard. And then they would be doing it at home as well. This picture I really like because it says it's compostable in industrial facilities. And the woman was like, well, of course it's going to be composted in an industrial facility, boop, right into the compost bin. So they didn't understand, and why would they, that meant it was only compostable if it was collected from a industrial facility. And then the other thing, which was just really interesting and made sense, was people knew that they couldn't have coated items in the compost bin, but coated was this ridiculously ambiguous term. And it was amazing. It was like, I just feel to see how much wax, if it felt papery, I'd put it in the compost. And they gave us some very specific examples, like cheese slice paper or the waxy paper around pears. And like one person had candy. He was like, does this go in, the compost? I don't know. And so we saw lots and lots of items where people were, kind of when in doubt, keep it in. And a lot of that was because they felt good by the amount of composting they were doing. There was a lot more to this study than just those things. But because of limited time, I thought those were 4 of the most interesting things that kind of demonstrate why qualitative can be so important in getting some insights. I'm going to move on to another project, and these projects I'll spend less time on. BOEING Credit Union wanted to create products and services that will appeal to the incoming freshmen. And so we talked to high school seniors who were headed to Washington State colleges or universities, and they wanted to understand really the relationship of incoming freshmen have with money so that they could understand, where the gaps were so that they could help fill in. And so what we did here was the 3-day online qualitative research study. And I don't know how many people here are familiar with this methodology, but obviously we can't be doing in-homes now. But online qualitative research is extremely useful because people have gotten very comfortable sharing their opinions in this venue. It looks and feels a lot like social media platforms. You can cast a super wide net, so I can talk to people all over the country at one time. You can reach multiple audience types simultaneously. You can easily analyze results. I'm not going to go into all the benefits of this, but this is what we used for that particular study. And what did we do differently? Well, one of the research activities we had people do was create a meme that demonstrated their relationship with money. And it yielded, it was really interesting. The memes fell into like 5 very distinct categories, and I'm going to show them to you. The first one was, money is not the root of all evil. Money is a good thing, to earn it, to have it, and to spend it. So you see, money can't buy love. False. Money bought me a puppy. When you get your first paycheck, yay. Money might not be able to buy you happiness, but it sure as hell won't make you sad. So this was one big theme we heard. Another theme, I love this one. I know I need to be more diligent, but ignorance is bliss. And this is my favorite one. When I withdraw money, I always hit the no receipt option. I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. So each one of these memes is another twist on kind of, I know I need to be more diligent, but I don't want to know. I have no idea how much money I have left. And at this point, I'm too afraid to look. And at this, I love this one. My debit card is starting to feel more like a gift card. Not sure how much more is on this, but we'll give it a try. So you can see how richly these themes are communicated by the audience. And you can imagine trying to talk to 18-year-olds about their relationship to money. Here is, I spend too much, especially on things I don't really need. So me, how do I save money? Friends, stop spending money on things you don't need. Me, nope, don't like that. So I'm not going to read all of these, but it's again, the same basic themes came up in a bunch of these memes.
2-minute warning.
Great. I'm almost done, so that's perfect. And then I have good intentions, but no willpower. And here in these memes, we see basically that being played out. And I am going to skip my last example because we have only 2 minutes left. So questions.
Hi, thank you for that. And sorry for rushing you through the end of your presentation.
That's fine. I didn't, how when you try and time these things, you're just never sure.
I wonder whether you could just reflect slightly on how you can make generalizations from qualitative research if it is so sort of hyper-personal. How could jurisdictions or businesses kind of take that research and then apply it to a general population?
What's fascinating, well, first of all, that's why I say qual and quant work together. But what I will say is what's fascinating is, as a practitioner of qualitative for probably 15 years now, maybe even a little more, it's amazing how consistent the themes are. They may not be articulated the exact same way, and the circumstances surrounding them may not be exactly different. But what you're listening for in qualitative research is common themes. You're not trying to measure differences. And that's where people, I think, have a hard time. We're not trying to say, what are the differences between this subpopulation and this subpopulation? We're really more trying to see within a subpopulation, what are the common themes? And then potentially, is there a subpopulation that does or does not have that same theme? So what we do a lot with qualitative is use it as the basis for quantitative, or we take quantitative and use it to go deeper for qualitative. But I also think interpretation is super important, because we think in quantitative, we're asking a question that everybody understands, but then in qualitative, you realize, oh, their idea of sometimes is totally different than my idea of sometimes. I hope
Sorry, Heather, I think has a question. Heather, you've got 30 seconds for both questions.
Okay, I'll make it super quick. That was so fascinating. It sounds like one of the things you really learn with this approach is the muddled nature of messaging, and that people are bringing things together. Is this better for that than other techniques? In other words, you're seeing the full picture instead of just a little slice of what they think.
I mean, it depends a lot on the objective of the research, but the thing that was, one thing I didn't even talk about was, this was supposed to be about composting, but you couldn't just talk about composting because to the average person, it's about throwing stuff away. And people had elaborate systems in their house. They were putting a lot of effort into getting it wrong. And so it was just really, you had to get behind the scenes to understand that. So, and that messaging piece was one of it. We do a lot of message testing in the work that we have, and message testing is not about, do they like it? It's about, does it communicate what you want it to communicate? Is it believable? Is it relevant to me as a human being? So it's very important to understand kind of the ultimate objective of your research when you're putting together a research design.